Hello, everyone, and welcome to Yellow Seeds 101 with the writer. I'm Brittany King, your host. And today we have Eric Shapiro, journalist, screenwriter, filmmaker, and author based in California. And his latest book, Red Dennis, is out wherever books are sold. He recently wrote a piece for Yellow Seeds called Why Are We Afraid of Clowns? And it's so good, such a fun read. We're going to get into that right now. Welcome to Yellow Seeds, Eric. How are you doing, my friend?
Good. Thank you so much for having me. And I feel like the piece is like ours because you were the editor and we developed it and worked on it thoroughly together. So I'm excited to discuss.
You're the mastermind. I just gave a little this, a little tweak there. This piece is amazing, and it's you.
Thank you.
So let's just get into the conversation because I have a lot of questions for you. Like I mentioned, your piece is called Why Are We So Afraid of Clowns? And just to clarify for the audience, Eric isn't talking about like clowns from the circus or like Pennywise from It. That's another Zoom. That's another conversation. But can you like tell us what you mean by clowns and kind of briefly define how you're utilizing it within the piece?
Yeah, I guess it was more of an archetype. Like it was a way to describe comedians and a way to describe comedians in the context of their cultural function, and not just in American culture, but just in any culture, and not just now, but across time. So I figured clown was a good word to sort of denote and highlight like what it is I think they do and the purpose I think they're serving, which is to be irreverent and sardonic and create amusement and ridiculousness. And I think it's a cultural tradition. So instead of saying comedians are comics, which sort of embeds us in our present tense understanding of it, I figured I'd just call them clowns.
Nice. And also, have you, just for background, have you ever wrote in the comedy genre before?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You know, overtly, I have a novella called Love and Zombies that is overtly comic, but and it's like outwardly ridiculous. But I realize, you know, most of what I write, because I write news and opinion editorials. So in the course of doing news reporting, there's nothing funny, it's just facts. But I realize my editorials are usually sardonic, or there's an attitude and there's some degree of humor or sarcasm or a worldview that's a bit irreverent. And I would say that also goes for most of my fiction. Like even Red Dennis, which you just mentioned, and thank you, is kind of like a satire. It's kind of like an absurd view of the world. And that does come up for me a lot. So I'm not a comedian per se. And I also realized, which is why it was so exciting to work on the essay we're talking about, I enjoy writing about comedians. Like I've written about Louis C.K. in the aftermath of what he did. I wrote about Robin Williams after he died. I wrote about in Paris, the attack on Charlie Hebdo, the magazine where there was Islamic extremists that attacked the office of their satirical magazine and killed people. And I wrote about how the human brain processes humor. And I realized I'm really, really interested in humor, particularly more as it more becomes like the more subversive edge of culture.
Awesome. And I saw all of that humor and that sarcasm, but sharp wit in this essay. But before we get an essay, which is amazing, I love, people might be curious though about what type of comedy that you like. And you mentioned like Robin Williams, which I love, and you mentioned a few other people. But I feel like you can tell a lot about a person by the comedians they enjoy or specific things they find funny. So few questions. Who are some of your favorite comedians, and how would you classify your humor, and what makes you laugh?
Oh, wow. These are such good questions. Okay. I would say George Carlin is the greatest of all time. And I know that's almost a generic answer at this point because he's been, you know, he died, I think, over a decade ago now, and he's been lionized, and he gets like quoted and memed and cited. He gets claimed by the left, claimed by the right. Like everybody sort of like co-ops Carlin for their causes. And it's getting to the point where what he was might be a little lost, but he was very like abrasively witty, insightful, ridiculous, crude. And so I just like, I don't think anybody made me laugh harder. I do have to say CK, like in terms of actual laughs, like has actually had me on the floor. And like, that doesn't mean I'm gonna like, you know, I'm necessarily inclined to defend what he did. I know the essay goes into that and we can talk about it. But in terms of pound for pound, just being hilarious, he's pretty up there. Like the movie Airplane I grew up on, like The Naked Gun, like ludicrous, absurd humor. And I think I was telling you, like personally, like we homeschool our kids. So a couple of weeks ago, I was teaching my sons a comedy writing class. And I asked them just before we started writing exercises, I asked them to write down things they felt were funny. And they did it separately. They weren't like doing it with each other. And it was so interesting to see their answers. Like pretty much like it all boiled down to like inappropriate things, like bodily functions, like pants falling down, people falling down. For some reason, I find this endlessly amusing. They both separately said babies crying was funny, which is like, so like I was like, where did they come up with that? Like, but it does make sense because babies are like these little small humans like wailing, like it's absurd. So I would say, I don't know like what the commonality in terms of theme is, but I'm a good audience for my friends. Like I like to laugh, and I think comedic communication is very peacemaking. Like it like sort of like makes everybody unpretentious and like and just like, you know, you're sort of over yourself if you're making fun of yourself. And that's another part of the clown concept also I should throw in there, is that like a really good clown, I think first and foremost makes fun of themselves. And like I think where comedians stop being funny is when their humor is more outward facing and it's just like lampooning other people, but they're the cool one. I don't think that ever works as well as just like, I'm the maniac and I'm the idiot. And it's like, you know, that's the starting point. So I don't know how to quantify it, but I did learn from working out with my sons that any sense of like shattering decorum is probably like a key part of comedy, like as far as I'm concerned. I
agree with that. That's what I enjoy too, like comedians like Jim Carrey who laugh at themselves, and like Dave Chappelle. I like Anthony Jeselnik. I love Jamie Foxx, and I know he's not seen as like a stand-up comedian, but he did do stand-up comedy. But he's such an underrated talent, and he's so amazing. I love him, and I don't like humor that's too on the nose. Like I like it where it just makes me pause a little bit, and then I'm like, that was smart. And I like dry sarcasm and so
like a delayed release kind of.
And I think Dave gives me that a lot. But okay,
oh my God, he's like exquisite, like him as a writer. Like, it's just like, especially his endings of all Chappelle's specials, like the last line always can be taken like 3 to 4 different ways. And you might like a week later be like, oh wait, he might have meant that. And you know, it's like, it's fantastic.
I know, exactly. So let's get into your essay. You're the star of this interview. Okay. So in the beginning of your piece, you opened with the infamous Oscar slap between Will Smith and Chris Rock. And in your lead paragraph, you briefly discuss your initial thoughts and emotions as the event transpired. You stated, when the slap happened at the Oscars, it felt like a culmination point in terms of comedy. I was horrified by Will Smith's action, impressed by Chris Rock's composure, contemplating whether Chris knew about Jada's alopecia, gobsmacked by the Best Actor standing ovation and Will Smith's resulting speech. But amid it all, I was feeling something else, something in regards to the role of the clown in contemporary culture. First off, I just love how you wrote this piece. Very expressive, very sharp, very, very thoughtful and concise. And I like how you explained that this moment was beyond the moment for you. So can you talk about why this slap represented a culmination point in comedy and culture for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. And there's so much to this, but I think in the last few years, and COVID has played a role in this, like people being inside, but also the political situation, there's a certain part of the population. And I know the essay, one of your editorial mandates was to keep it nonpartisan. So I'm going to try and navigate this as like humanistically and compassionately as I can without taking sides, although it might be inevitable that I do. But there has been a patch of people in our culture that have become like against comedians, like comedians or certain comedians, you know, certain comedians are trouble. And you and I talked about this on one of your panels recently, like just the idea that comedians really can't be controlled. Like they're sort of operating without a leash. Like even if they have a $40 million Netflix deal, like, you know, the likes of Chappelle or Rock have had, you can't, like, in order for it to be really funny, there's going to be a degree of inappropriateness. And it doesn't even have to be inappropriateness per se. It can be more in the vein of like, they're going to dare to say what other people are too afraid to. And in the course of doing so, it's shocking and it elicits like a bodily reaction of humor. I mean, that's kind of their job, to go into terrain that's uncharted. And it's often inappropriate, but not necessarily, but certainly things other people are afraid to say. And then that has a natural conflict or contrast with people that are sort of concerned about certain sensitive issues, and their sensitivity as a natural matter, of course, is going to be spurred or riled on account of somebody making fun of things.
And going back into this piece, getting at what you were just saying, you said that, and I'm going to say some of this essay again. You said, but amid it all, I was feeling something else, something in regards to the role of the clown in contemporary culture. Then you say, as in somebody had finally walked up on stage and smacked one. Mind you, this didn't make me feel relieved. I like clowns. I think clowns signal a healthy and robust First Amendment. And this speaks to how clowns, speak about things that we don't or that we necessarily can't. And I say that in quotations. And as I've watched these, cultural conversations transpire, there's been a lot of people who would agree with your sentiments that comedians do represent a healthy, representation of the First Amendment. And then there's a lot of people that would say comedians often overstep the line and certain boundaries under the guise of utilizing free speech. So I have two questions for you. First, why do you believe that comedians signal a healthy and robust First Amendment?
Man, I mean,
that's loaded.
It's loaded. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just saying it's a loaded question.
I guess, what's at stake here fundamentally and over the course of history is the right to offend, right? Like, how sacred is that? And I guess I'm answering your question with a question, but it's like, in the arts, again, it's all about uncharted terrain. It's all about uncharted psychic and psychological terrain to express yourself through any art form, right? So when you go there, inevitably people that are in the terrain and committed to the terrain that hasn't been charted yet are inevitably going to be offended. It's almost natural, right? So it's like, what's the solution? To have no art? And that doesn't mean, let me like be full blown clear about this. There have been instances, I can't remember that, was his name Shane Gillis? The guy that was on SNL. He was hired, then he was fired because he had made Asian jokes. Like, his jokes were not funny. They were abysmal. Like, he sounded like an absolute racist. He was talking on a podcast and I heard it. I was like, ouch. Like, maybe or maybe not the solution was to fire him, but definitely he looked like abysmal. And it definitely was not the same as necessarily like crafted jokes on stage, which are ambiguous and designed to hit or test certain pressure points. So I'm not saying it's all created equal, nor am I saying that I can't get hurt or riled or offended by hate speech. Like with Chappelle in his special, which I have a feeling while we're talking, everybody's thinking about him because it so goes to the theme of what we're talking about. His joke, I'm Jewish, so his joke about space Jews, which he hit twice, I absolutely couldn't stand it. Like, I hated it. Like, I think he was off. I think he was under-researched. I think it was like first page of Google stuff. Doesn't mean I'm some pro-Israel person, but like, it was weak. And like, but that doesn't mean I think, delete the special from Netflix. So I want to be clear on both sides of this. Like, it's not like I get offended. Like, I'm not that sort of person, but I definitely like have a sensitivity. I can be annoyed and I can definitely severely disagree. But also I think like the key is to step back from yourself and realize you're part of a culture and a community. And like, if you don't like it, somebody else will. Like, so, I mean, that process needs room to work itself out.
I agree with that. Before I get into what I think, because just speaking to the Dave Chappelle thing, certain, specials or jokes that Dave has had, even though I would say I'm a fan of Dave, there's definitely times where I don't laugh, where I'm just like, this one is a miss. And I'm not gonna laugh.
Thank you for saying that.
Throw it out,
Absolutely.
I'm gonna ask this question because it's exactly, and your answer will be to this. Okay. I just want to say, because I think you more or less answered it. I was just gonna say, do you think there's a line or certain boundaries comedians can cross, shouldn't cross, or do you think there's kind of not a line?
Oh man, it would be hard to quantify the line. Let me say, as far as Chappelle goes, I don't know how well that will age, the closer. I think it'll probably look like Eddie Murphy's Raw. I think it'll probably in 20 or 30 years look outright hateful. Now, the line he's on, speaking of lines, and I'm using him to exemplify the whole answer. Speaking of lines, okay, throughout human history, like bigotry or hatred, like racism, sexism, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, all has boiled down like to dehumanizing the other party, right? With transgender rights, there's a different piece because of the nature of how transgender people are. The different piece is it doesn't just boil down to dehumanizing them, which is bad enough. And wait, let me use my language carefully. It's a tough thing to talk about, but with upholding and protecting and standing with transgender people, there's a certain amount of buy-in that goes on. And I think that should go on and that I personally, participate in. For example, using their chosen pronouns. Or for example, if somebody is a trans woman, not insisting that she's not a woman. These are things that for me, like I'm not with Chappelle at all. Like I think automatically, and I've been like this since I was a child. This is not just like new culture war, like handy opinions I've formed. I think, yeah, okay, she wants to be a woman. She's a woman. Like, it's not some big hump I have to get over at all. Like, quite the contrary. I'm surprised to see other people struggle with it. Doesn't mean I get all upset about it. You know, that's a whole other thing, the temperamental reaction. But with trans people, it's a whole different constellation of behaviors that goes on, because and that's what moves the line and creates all this chatter culturally we're hearing. Is, again, it's not just a matter of you're Black or you're Jewish or you're Asian or you're Hispanic, and I nonetheless, A, respect your humanity, and B, am inclined to perceive the systemic ways in which you're disadvantaged. That's like the classic perception or abiding by, I don't want to say tolerance, that's utterly the wrong word, accepting each other as human beings, right? With trans people, they are asking for more, right? And I like scarcely notice that there's any sort of exertion that has to go on. Dave Chappelle feels he has to exert himself. He feels he's being asked for too much. He feels the buy-in with the pronouns is too much. He feels saying that you're a woman when you can't give birth to a child is too much. On a certain level, this is reprehensible. Like, he really is an old man. On the other hand, his whole special was crafted around, like, half of it is acclaiming, upholding, loving, and revering his trans friend Daphne. And he's humanizing her, and he's humanizing her utterly per the old way of, like, not being a hater, like having a heart of hatred, right? So I'm trying to, like, piece my way toward, like, where the line is. It's what he was doing in that special was testing and auditing the line. That's what he spent an hour up there doing. And it made people crazy, but also ultimately a lot of people are like, look, he had a trans friend and that trans friend killed herself as a result of pressure from her own group, and that's a problem. And you can't look away from that. And if you do, you're a hypocrite. And it just became that he knew what he was doing. He set off a bomb within the culture wars. Is there a line? I mean, humor is an intuitive, automatic, instinctual nervous system thing. And if you make the audience howl, like it is sort of an absolute. It's like a horror movie. It's like horror and comedy are sort of like siblings or cousins, like two sides of one coin. If you've got that whole movie house scared and like, don't open the door, or if you've got the whole comedy house falling out of their seats, I mean, it's an eternal mystery that to quantify it and draw lines. It reminds me of, the last thing I'll say is Dead Poets Society is one of my favorite movies, right? And there's a scene, it's all about expressing yourself, aligning with your truth, being true to your own heart. It's also a really good movie, a friend of mine pointed out, about masculinity, not like buying into like tired ideas of masculinity and toughness. It's about being vulnerable. Beautiful, beautiful movie. And one of the key moments of authoritarianism is one of the English teachers writes a chart on the board and says, here's how you achieve greatness in poetry. And it's like a chart and a graph and a scale. It's like, here's how greatness is achieved. And it's utter BS. Like, anybody with half a brain watching it would know that this is authoritarian, it's weak, it's cold, and you can't devise rules for creating great art. It has to be at a certain level anarchic. And when you see anarchy like Dave Chappelle, there is an ugliness to it. There is a trash to it. There's also a greatness to it. And like, let me tell you, like, I was such a movie kid growing up. Movies were our culture. Before social media became the center of culture, it was all movie culture. That was what everybody talked about, was movies, and they've been displaced. When The Closer dropped, I received so many texts from people telling me to watch it. And by then I had already watched it. I'm talking about like 9 people. Like it was like the must-see thing. It was like the most talked about movie of the 21st century. And that just says, that's a commentary on clowns, where clowns are, how dangerous they are, how volatile it is, where the culture is. And it's just the fact of the matter. But I think ultimately, despite whatever my personal reactions or opinions might be in terms of not being with him on trans people, not being with him on Jewish people, an artist who's an anarchist is probably a good thing. It'll stimulate thought, it'll stimulate discussion, it'll also demonstrate that there's room in a culture for like neurosis, psychosis, strange thoughts, questions, arguments without violence, because that's art, it's just art, you're making something. So that's where I am with it.
I share your sentiments on that. And I've been thinking about the line more so with all this controversy, which is comedy and people's point of view of the line and boundaries and things are overstepping or not. And I just think as individuals, we create our own boundaries and our own lines. Like the fact that I didn't laugh at a certain Dave Chappelle joke or you, maybe that was our line and boundary, but it's not to say, well, because we're not laughing, then he needs to go. It's like, no,
right. I mean,
we're not laughing.
Very well said. Like where, if he goes, like, where do you put him? That's the thing too. It's like, what is the solution? Where he's banished, he sits at home. Like, it's not like, it's like antisocial solutions.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like comedy. I don't know if you see it like this, but comedy is like just like a diet. Like, we all decide our intake. We all decide what we want to consume in the way of comedians and jokes. And it's like a menu at a restaurant. Like, you go to a restaurant and you just order the thing you like, and the thing that you don't like, you don't order. You don't boycott, at least in my opinion. I'm not going to boycott the thing or the seafood if I don't like seafood, which I love seafood. But like, it's just like you support what you want, and you give the money and you amplify, let's just say in the space of comedy, the comedian that you like. And then honestly, like a restaurant in a way, the comedians that don't get the business or don't get the support, I think naturally just kind of like die out in a way. Just like restaurants, if they don't have quality food, quality service, it's not like I'm going to boycott you, but the less of us that go, then you're not going to be able to remain afloat, and you're just going to go out of business. I think a lot of comedians naturally will go out of business, if you will. So I just feel like when we make our own lines and our own boundaries, then we see the people that are weaponizing their comedy just for, let's say, evil and not
like shock and
exactly. Then I think they naturally go, in my opinion.
That's a really good point. Yeah, that is, there almost is a Darwinian aspect to it. And also, your point really also goes to the fact that culture is unconscious. Like, it's an unconscious contract. What the things that culture is made of, you know, and some things last, other things don't. Like I love thinking about movies that were acclaimed when they came out that nobody cares about 5 years later. Like, I always talk about the movie Syriana with George Clooney. Like, when it came out, it was like, this is a revolution in political filmmaking, and it won Oscars and got nominations. And like, who's watching that right now? You know, like things just like, not everything is evergreen.
Exactly. And going back into your piece, speaking of evergreen, this piece, you do such a great job at like conceptualizing complicated ideas and condensing them down to characters, archetypes, like the clown or comedians as clowns. And then you do in the middle of the piece, you do the same thing when you describe the two prominent groups opposed right now in the comedy war. You say one side is the jesters, the other side the Solomons. And I have a few things I want to get into, but first, can you just break down a bit for the audience what you mean by the jesters and then the Solomons?
Yeah. So the jesters are the clowns, you know, the people that joke, the irreverent ones, the ridiculous ones, the ones that are breaking with decorum, you know, like they're there to audit and question and test what's appropriate, and thereby create laughter and hopefully merriment and mirth and joy and not outrage. But the solemn, on the other hand, it's the W word. It's like, once you say the word, the whole conversation gets charged. In terms of wokeism, like, and I don't mean wokeness, like, I guess there's a distinction. Like, I don't mean awareness of systemic injustice, the original definition, at all. Like, I'm totally all about that. I think anybody with half a brain is aware of how that works, or who's interested in politics. But I mean, like, human bumper sticker, online pile-on culture, virtue signaling, sanctimony, holier than thou. See what I just did? I just started criticizing them. That's the solemn. Yeah. I tried to be nonpartisan. The solemn, let me be more fair to them. Let me be more humanized and fair to them. And I also don't want to suggest it's some like group, because a lot of people I know, and I'm even in this category at times, are sort of between like the classical liberal and the quote unquote woke person. I realize that is a lot of the people I interact with. Like, some of their ideas are woke or wokish. In other ways, they're more like, no, live and let live, you know? So it's not like I want to like paint a picture of them as one group, even though it's tempting to do so. And even though I know people like create content where they're always being talked about as a they. So to be more fair to the solemn, these are just people with acute social justice concerns that don't think that lampooning them, buffoonery around them, or laughing about them, or being silly is a productive or evolved thing. And, you know, I mean, the perfect example is Chappelle. Like I say again, even though I don't think the special should be deleted, you know, look, we're sitting here talking about it. That's the measure of a work of art, number one. You know, how great or how valuable or whatever can also be discussed. But Yeah, like I am absolutely capable of like looking at that and feeling, oh, he's an old man. Like he doesn't get it. He's behind the curve, which is like a kind of a woke thought. So to humanize the solemn, they're just not, they're in a more frame of activism, progressivism, and they're just not having it with just joking around.
And from a writer's perspective, what made you choose these archetypes? I guess you kind of talked about it when you described wanting to do the clowns and comedians, but what made you want to do these archetypes? And I think I said Solomons, I meant Solemns. Sorry, my bad. But go ahead.
Oh, what is it? What do you say?
I think I introduced, I said the jesters and the Solomons, and I meant Solemns.
Oh, okay, got it. Yeah. Oh, perfect. Okay. And jesters. Okay. Just clowns. I mean, I think I said jester because it further accentuates the historical cultural function, like the jester entertained the king, right? So it further accentuates this idea of like an anarchist within the establishment. Like the jester is there to, the jester can be so brave as to test the king, which is what they're there for. And the king represents the status quo, authority, and possibly even penalties. And the jester is a cultural function of like, I was just going to give the finger to the camera. I won't do that, but take that, king. You know what I mean? So like, that's the jester. The solemn, and I tried to use a word that I wanted to be dignified. The solemn, and it's so funny. I wonder how, when the piece goes out, the reaction will be to that, because it wouldn't surprise me if people that are in the solemn category want to say like, no, you're misunderstanding. We're actually the life of the party. Like, so I don't know. But I tried to use a word that had dignity, and I think that's the best word, because there's an oh my God. I guess I just have to speak freely. There's an ideological religiosity to what they're doing, and it's serious. It's serious. They're not funny. Like what they do, it's not fun or funny, or like I said, comedy is merrymaking or peacemaking. Like that's not their project in the world. Their project in the world is to ground people out, draw attention to the seriousness of issues, draw attention to perspectives that are marginalized or not heard from, and that in the course of being marginalized really don't need the crap of having their problem made fun of. And you can see that with Jada in a sort of micro example. Like she's dealing with an autoimmune condition, as I understand it. And like, who is he to get out there and make fun of her? At least that was their reaction, the Smith side of the equation. Yeah.
But it's funny enough that you said that people might be upset by you talking about Solomon this way, because I actually thought that even though, yes, currently we do see that these two groups are going at it, so to speak, but I think that you've actually brought in nuance with talking about the jesters and the solemn. And specifically, I just want to talk about what you actually said, so the audience knows. And again, please read this piece. Anyway, here we go. You said the problem with the solemn is they have a good point. They always have a good point. When Dave Chappelle's onstage jokes are identical to dead serious hate speech found in the comment section of trans creators' YouTube videos, the Solomon have a point. When Joe Rogan cavalierly uses a word steeped in a centuries-old history of atrocity and pain, the Solomon have a point. Then you go on to say, and I'm paraphrasing some of this, then you go on to say, the jesters have a point as well. For the jesters, life is and always will be ridiculous. Nothing is off limits, and there can be no punching down when all of us at every moment are being punched down on by life. I think this was an excellent, just illustration of just basically saying life hits us all. Everyone gets punched, no pun intended. And in some way, we're all facing something. Even if it's not the same thing, we're all facing something. So also with this, I think you are making a case for the jesters and the solemn having a purpose in society and culture. Like they both have their place. Is that what you basically were saying?
I think so. But this gets to a more delicate point, which is the solemn. I'm trying to figure out how much emotional energy I have to follow this conclusion.
Give us all of it.
The inevitable outcome of talking about this openly. Let me think for a second. The solemn, let me put it this way. There's talk in the past decade or so, more and more talk on campuses about safe spaces. And I know that gets made fun of, but I also think it's a reasonable concept. Like you have a space where men aren't allowed, or maybe only queer people are allowed in that space, because it's then you can talk openly, right? So I also think, like, by the same principle, certain spaces are not by, I don't even want to use the word design. By way of their unconscious cultural roots, they're not necessarily the space for social activism. The arts is one of them. That's why I said it was anarchic. Now, the arts, especially like pop art, like TV and movies, are hugely progressive in such a good way. Like, if you look at how much like sitcoms did for the gay community in America, it's extraordinary. Like, representing gay characters, bringing them into our homes, allowing people to, feel a human connection to a minority population, and utterly played a huge, meaningful role in something progressive and something positive and good. Where the line is, as far as all that goes, with the cultural purpose is, you can't, and here's a charged word, like, you can't co-opt every space and turn it into your social justice project. That's what Chappelle was revolting against. And in a way, seeing him up there, I was almost like, I'm looking at a guy who's been radicalized, because he's so tired of hearing a counter voice within a space where the objective is to laugh and fool around and say silly, dumb things. And now he's up against this dead serious counter resistance. So my opinion as to all that is, yes, they absolutely do both have a function in society. In my bias, and I'll admit that it's a bias, I see the solemn invading comedy. I don't see any comedians invading the solemn. I think comedians wouldn't have a purpose unless they invaded the solemn. Like, there's no other thing for them to do. Otherwise, everything is censored. Every group, every topic, every single thing is off limits. And then you don't have free speech. And then where do you go? There's an inevitable authoritarian drift that you can't get away from, as much as I or you or anyone might be sensitive about this topic or that.
Well, I don't know how you feel about this part I'm about to say, because as I was reading your piece, more and more and more, I was like, I think I encompass both of, like, and a jester. Like, when someone's comedy is identical to horrific hate speech, then conversation should be had. Like you said, on my personal channel, like, even if I don't agree with the so-called outrage, I still am like, the fact that people are outraged, we should be talking about it and understanding why. And I don't see like any foul play into that. But also, I do see clowns and jesters are so necessary for society too. Like, we need levity as humans, and levity helps us break down the barriers and helps us talk about hard things that we're dealing with in life. So my question for you, and I think more or less you might have answered it, but do you think that you encompass both the jester and the solemn in ways? Do you think it should balance us out if we do, or?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've had mental health issues, right? I have OCD, anxiety. Like, I'm not really that into anybody saying I'm crazy. Like, I've gotten better. I'm almost 44 years old. So, like, it's not like it happens all the time either. But I could do without that. You know what I mean? That's a button for me, especially because I'm high functioning. Like, I make a good living. I have a family. So it's like, I don't need to hear that. What else? Like, the Jewish thing is less sensitive. It's funny, the Jewish thing actually supports the jester side a little more, because it's part of my culture. I've realized more and more as I've gotten older that, you know, with the Holocaust and all the atrocities we've been through and not having a home and wandering around the planet, humor became a huge part of, and I think it's the same with the Black community. Humor became like part of the survival and uplift process, you know, to make fun of the situation ourselves, because like, when you're faced with atrocity, you're also faced with absurdity. So I think that's why I might tip toward a little bit, I wouldn't even say jester bias, like an absurdism bias. Yeah, but I don't know if I'm like ever get dead serious about anything. Like, you would have to offend me personally to find me like my humor goes to zero, and you're just dealing with an impossible PRICK. Like, you would have to like say like my writing, my.
Thank you for spelling that out.
Yeah, I'm used to it because I have kids. Yeah, like, you would have to say like, I suck as an artist, and I'm like, okay, it's on now. You know, like, I hate you, and now I'm the least good-humored person. But as far as a more broad-based social ill, I mean, there are not only innumerable, like, I find almost every systemic institutionalized process that goes on dated, horrific on some level, outmoded. Like, I think, for example, capitalism can be a source of joy and enthusiasm and fun, and you're making money, you're hustling, you're kicking ass. But I also think it's like a horrific holdover from slavery on a lot of levels that's eventually going to get aged out. You know, that you're on we're like wage slaves. So, and I mean like varying forms of slavery in addition. So I have a balance of both. I think in terms of my communications and my attitude, there's probably a shift toward something just more absurd and maybe even like surrealistic, but not necessarily just like a goofball that only wants to lampoon everything. Like that's not who I am either. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. I definitely agree with you about the absurdity, and I probably lean that way more. And you're right. Yeah, being Black, I'm not gonna lie. Being a minority, yes, there's certain things. It's not to say every day I'm just going through struggling and trying to laugh off life. That's not it.
Well,
There's certain things that happen, like definitely being followed around the store. Definitely, just certain things that you're like, okay, this probably might be because of my skin. And you know, sometimes just laughing about it and seeing the absurdity in what they're doing and laughing at their actions kind of gives me my power back, and just laughing at it just takes their power away from me. Now,
sorry to interrupt.
No, I was just said, obviously, if it's something that's like more extreme, I'm not laughing. Like I'm going to do something about it. Like if my life, but if it's something walking around and I'm just like, it could be this, could be that, you know, I'll just laugh it off.
Right. That is such a good thing that you hit on, the empowerment piece. I think that's the key of what I was trying to say, is that, yeah, being able to like laugh at something definitely re-leverages your power. It is empowering. It's like literally making light of things. You're taking the weight off of them. And like, it's interesting, like on my end of things, like in business deals, I've done a lot of ghostwriting and speechwriting. So on my end of things, like people know I'm Jewish. So much of the time they're afraid I'm going to screw them. Like they're afraid, like not like a high percentage, but that's something that's come up over the years. They're afraid, they don't know, when it's time for the contract, I'm going to cheat, I'm going to do all these nefarious things. And sometimes I just joke about it with them openly. And I'll be like, no, don't worry, I'm not going to do anything. Like everything's, it's just like, and talk about taking the power back.
You're
it's
safe,
like,
you're safe.
Yeah, it's like out in the open now. So it's like, all right, everybody calm down. Yeah.
And even with jokes like that, and now I'm going to move on to next your question. Sure. But even like jokes like that, I know there's a lot of jokes, and I won't say specific comedians, but there might be a comedian that says, let's just say a joke that deals with, this might be a racial joke, and it might be like centering on like a specific minority, but they're not making fun of the minority, they're making fun of the racism. Like they're showing the absurdity of racism. And then and I'm laughing hard, even if they talk about a Black person, and because I know that they're not laughing at me. They're laughing at the fact that what we have to face sometimes in this life, and showing how stupid racism is. And what I like about comedy is it can help you check yourself. Like if you're someone laughing at, at the racism and how stupid it is, like, okay. But if you find yourself laughing at the minority and laughing with racism in that moment, that could be a chance for you to kind of be like, why did I just laugh in a way that I don't feel other people are laughing at? So I think comedy is so much more important than people give it. But that's just me.
Right. Yeah, no, you're 100% right. And the conversation is even just the sort of conversation we're having, and that so many people can have about where the line is. And you just hit on something really important. When there is an offensive or potentially offensive or racist or line crossing joke made, like inevitably, I think this is what the solemn are afraid of, and they are well based in their fear. Inevitably, you're like sort of inviting real nefarious, dangerous people to laugh with you. And it was a key moment with me. Sorry to keep going back to the Chappelle one, but it's so emblematic of the whole discussion. It was a key moment. Like I was watching trans YouTube creators respond to this special, and some of them liked it and others didn't. But under one of their videos, no, I would say under all their videos, there's hate, to be honest. And under one of the videos, there was so much hate about the person's appearance and just horrific bullying, abusive words put toward the creator, which was just so ugly. And I was reading it, and that's why I put the line in the essay. It was a meaningful moment for me. I'm like, the only difference between what I'm reading right now and the jokes he said on stage is that he's trying to be funny. These people are trying to like get this person to hate themselves. So it's like, and that's disgusting. So for him to stand up there and empower monsters is a whole other thing. And you've got to be careful. Like ultimately, and like, me with writing thrillers and crime stories and horror stories, when I write fiction, like I've definitely depicted murderers and like not like, and violent acts. And like the best I can do is like, again, because I default to this anarchic mindset about the whole thing. Like I have a real hard time thinking artists should be responsible, because it's like kind of not your job. Your job is just to have human insight and reflect the human condition back to itself. That said, I mean, there's a difference between violence in like a Fast and Furious movie where it's silly and cartoonish and human life is reduced to like a video game, and like a Scorsese movie where people get really scared, people get really hurt and anxious, and then they have trauma. You know, so it's like there's such a variety of tones and terrain and this and that. And but this, I guess it all goes back to why the arts are so important, because the discussion is important, and I think it cultivates intellect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And getting back into, we're gonna just piggyback off that, because
Okay.
there's these passages also speak to the intersectional conversation happening, not just in comedy, but in every sector of culture. But since we're talking about comedy, we'll just stick with that. There's this complex discussion happening specifically with comedians like Kevin Hart or Dave Chappelle, for example, like being considered part of the problem when they so-called punch down on the disenfranchised or marginalized, but also being people who possess identities that fall into those marginalized categories. Like Dave and Kevin are both straight men, but they're Black men. And then in your piece, you get at some intersectional commentary with this passage, and I'm paraphrasing it down, but you said, some offer a solution for comedians to avoid any backlash in terms of power dynamics. That solution is to avoid punching down. In other words, never make jokes at the expense of a less powerful party, and you'll be fine. Then you go on to say, comedians don't like rules, and that they're basically like Batman's main nemesis, the Joker, and that Jokers are not funny. He's destabilizing, terrifying. Here's a loaded question for you again. And you can go anywhere you want with this. What are your thoughts on the intersectional conversation happening in the space of comedy? And do you think any current conversations are effective or not? Like, what are your thoughts?
It kind of reminds me of the Teacher and Dead Poet Society again, with the chalkboard, like creating rules and lines. Like intersectionality and identifying systemic oppression is so valuable. It's so something everybody, I can only speak for Americans. This is where I am, and this is the culture I try to understand. It's so valuable for everybody to look at it, everybody to understand it, everybody to dance with it and let it inform your decisions in terms of your content, your vote, who you hire. You know, it raises consciousness. It's a double-edged sword. It also can create division. I mean, that was, I feel like I'm a broken record going back to that one, because it was such a touchstone in comedy. I thought we would talk more about the slap, but I realized I keep going back to Chappelle. It's because he was like, he's kind of demonstrating on stage how intersectionality, and you just said this in your question, it can turn in on itself. Like Obama said, it can become a circular firing squad. Like he's a Black guy. So there's like, you know, nobody's going to tell him that oppression has not impeded upon his life, whether or not that's the word he would choose, or however he would describe it. Like, that's why he's bold enough to get up there and say the things he said. But he sort of, the special is like a living demonstration of how these things can turn inward, not only turn inward on themselves, but also it has a reductive influence on perceiving people as people, and divides us into groups. I mean, this is inevitable. We're seeing this play out. We've been seeing it play out since like 2014 consistently. And a lot of people, if you're watching closely, it's a lot of the reason people that voted for Trump voted for him, because they were against quote unquote political correctness. But you know, the left would prefer to believe, no, there's just 70 million white supremacists in this country, and that's what it turns out they like. There's truth in that. I mean, he ennobled a lot of neo-Nazis and KKK people, like the most despicable people in society, but that doesn't tell the whole story. A lot of people were drawn to what a noxious, gaseous, arrogant, like ridiculous person he was, because he was saying whatever was on his mind. And so this is where we are culturally, and intersectionality is so shocking. Like it strikes such a blow to white consciousness that we're now seeing all the noise resulting from that. And I'm a white, so I'm a straight white guy, right? So, but there's asterisks next to all three of those. Like, I'm white, but I'm Jewish. So nobody, like, white supremacy definitely does not like me. You know what I mean? Like, so it's like, that's a whole different trajectory through my life and my history. I'm also straight, but I definitely with commonality experience being attracted to men, and have experiences that bear that out. But, you know, I'm overwhelmingly attracted to women. And then I'm also a man.
I'm overwhelmingly attracted to men, for sure.
Right. Yeah. So, and yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, like, given the choice, it's like, oh man, women are so attractive. But it's like, it's not like I think men are unattractive, and I always see men I think are really hot. Like, so it's like, okay, and I know a lot of guys would not sit here and say that openly. It's taboo because you want to be
dude,
straight.
that dude's so hot. Men
Right, yeah, exactly. And I might gain advantage because I'm very masculine, so I might have a certain like entrenched bravery or privilege about being open about that, because like you know, like it gets with guys, it's like there's always this pressure to not be too soft, right? And on that note, as far as gender goes, like I've never, since I was a child, I've never been too invested in my gender identity one way or the other. And again, it could be because I'm kind of intense and I'm masculine, so I could be leveraged so comfortably in the masculine side that I just don't care, and I'm like, yeah, bring it on. But I absolutely have, like, you know, I've been a ghostwriter for thousands of people, and I would say the majority of them are women. So it was something I was aware of as a kid, but also ghostwriting women and like their messaging, their speeches, their books, and getting into their rhythms and their language and their emotions. Like, it was just such a beautiful thing. It felt like acting, but I was playing the role of a woman. I love it. So I don't have any sort of fixated gender thing going on either. So the reason I cite those asterisks is that's what's going on with me, right? It's totally alt, and it's totally like far left leaning, right? That's who I am. Still, to hear straight white men talked about the way they are all the time drives me crazy. So because it drives me crazy, I only wonder what like Kenny from Kansas with a gun on his hip thinks when he hears this. And what he thinks is, F you, I'm going to be a Republican, and I'm over here now. And the point is, it has a radicalizing effect. And I think that's what we're seeing among comedians. Like, all right, I'm going to say again, let me say this full blown. Intersectionality, intersectional feminism, absolutely valuable, eye-opening, important, cultivates consciousness, cultivates a sense of civic awareness, and utterly can make inroads towards systemic injustice. Everybody should be aware of what it has to say. You know, everybody on down, from cops to judges to artists to, you know, it is a valuable piece of consciousness. If it wasn't, it would not be so monumentally pervasive at this point in history. What we are seeing, though, as an outgrowth of its monumental presence in the left is a lot of division. And again, as a straight white guy, and I have no shame about that, I'm not trying to back off it. It's no problem for me being that or showing up as that in the world. But to hear that my SHIT is so played out, and it's so like, and I'm not cool, and I'm like, you know, putting the systemic aside and what white supremacy has been, like to hear the individuated messaging is so hurtful. It is radicalizing. And again, when you look on stage and you see a comedian testing those limits, you might be seeing the outgrowth of radicalization because they're tired of being brutally criticized and dehumanized for their immutable traits. So that's where we are. I mean, so that's part of what the Solemn are bringing. And it's very uphill. It's very radical. It's very warlike. So, I mean, if that's the battle they want to face, that's fine. But the white supremacists are the ones that come with machine guns, you know? So everybody's got to cool out, you know?
So you got into a lot of complexities about us as humans, which was really profound and great. And also what you said about political correctness goes into my next question. Did you hear about what happened over at Netflix?
Oh yeah, I've been reading a lot about it. Yeah, I guess three waves. Like, first they released their culture memo, basically saying like, we have a breadth of content, and in order to work here, like, you know, you have to work on things you might find harmful, which is a direct outgrowth of everything that happened with the closer. And then they fired 150 people. It was like 2% of their staff. And then they canceled a bunch of content, I think a good deal of which was like social justice oriented. Yes, it was a big, it was like a big wave of activity in like the past 10 days.
What do you think about what's happening? Because that's like really precedented. Like, that's something that normally doesn't happen. Usually what happens with big businesses like Netflix and these huge streaming services like that, or just business in general, you know, when there's like, let's say a majority is saying something, and especially employees, they kind of bend to their will, so to speak, even if it doesn't like align with their initial principles. And now it's like they're pushing back, and this doesn't normally happen. So how do you feel about what's going on?
I'm not sure. Like, it depends what they do next, because based on what they canceled and who they let go, they would have to have, and they're in a position to do this. They have the money, they have the cultural influence. They lost 200,000 subscribers, so they're obviously nervous. They want to put out programming that's exciting, that gets everybody talking. I don't want to say function because it's such a cold word, but I mean, the arts are like, essentially, if it's going to be art and not just entertainment or commerce, it should have a countercultural element to it. Like I was saying before with Uncharted Terrain. So if they suddenly administered content that was more subversive or shocking and less ideological, and that doesn't mean let me be very clear about this because I'm a white guy. The representation, I mean, should be absolute. I mean, I don't care who's into things, but people want to be entertained so they can be electrified and have fun. And I think a good measuring stick for like what's fun and entertaining is the group that's pretty much been betrayed by at least the Democratic Party, is the working class. Like these are the people that can sit and enjoy Kill Bill, or they'll enjoy Goodfellas. Like they, that's most people. So like they don't want to be lectured to, and Netflix knows that because if stuff like that was popular, then Joe Rogan wouldn't be the most popular podcaster at Spotify. And Chappelle's special wouldn't be one of the most popular things they dropped last year. And the counter ideological or counter political narrative is that they lost subscribers because of Chappelle. That's certainly possible, but they were in the meantime playing to a subscriber base that was being administered a lot of like very aggressively far left leaning content. So if that's who the subscriber pool was populated by, of course, Chappelle's going to turn them way off. On the other hand, with that special, they got like everybody in the world talking, right? Like I said, I haven't seen that with a movie, even though it was a comedy special, in like decades. So that's their job as entertainers. And I think it's what Netflix is experiencing. So I don't have complete faith they'll do the right thing. Like I think a good template is HBO. Like HBO has a really good game face. Their content is generally kind of dark, and there's always like I hate saying this because it makes me sound so old, but there's an edge to it. Like Netflix, I feel like is just different. Like they've been in the game less long. They're more prone to content that's like bloated. HBO has never played any games. Like they've never I think they canceled one thing correctly and rightfully. It was like a reverse slavery narrative where like from the 1800s. Do you remember that? There was going to be a show where they were planning a series where the white people were slaves and everything was opposite. And it was like two white guys that were the showrunners. Yeah, so they canceled. I mean, that's absolutely, yeah. Like I wouldn't want to watch.
You can't rewrite history.
Yeah, exactly. So that's not clever or cute, right? So again, like I have my own. Like you said, like it's a perfect point. Like our lines are personal. I think they made the right call. But in general, HBO is also where Bill Maher is. Like every week, he's complaining about cancel culture, and he's not there with any of this stuff, right? So. If Netflix skewers more toward HBO, that'd be good because they would not only be representing diverse voices, which they already do, but it would just be a harder edged, sort of more genuinely entertaining, incisive content. Like I hate even calling it content because it sounds like anti-entertainment, but they need to get back to being just fun and exuberant and not just messaging. And that's good advice for any artist. Like artists and screenwriters and TV show writers that are aspiring or in the game should pay attention because don't think if you kowtow to a certain set of ideas, that's necessarily what's going to sell now because Netflix is in charge, like they lead, right? So we're also seeing it, and I know I'm talking on and on, but we're also seeing it at Spotify and Twitter because Elon Musk bought Twitter and he's going to revise the user rules. And we saw it at Spotify because they did the same thing that the CEO of Netflix did because they, as I say in the essay, like they came for Rogan because he used the N-word. He apologized. I think he should have. I don't think he should have used the word, but they wanted him deplatformed. And the CEO, now it's like a CEO thing where the executives are like standing up for their content, especially when it's highly popular. He's like, yeah, we're not going to take Rogan down because that's a slippery slope. So we've actually seen it now in 3 big corporations. Twitter's different from the other 2, but yeah, I mean, where it goes next is important. Like, I think with any marginalized group, like even, let me just talk about my own group, because if I subject this observation to another group, it'll sound bad, but I would rather see a group about a bunch of Jewish guys robbing a bank. I would rather see a show about a group of Jewish guys robbing a bank than like a solemn thing about a bunch of people attending temple. You know what I mean? Like I want to watch a show. So it's entertain me. And I understand it's the imagination. Yeah.
And I did not hear about the thing about them canceling. You said like they canceled 150 pieces of content on social justice. Netflix?
Oh, they fired 150 employees.
Oh,
and then but the things they chose to cancel, there was a streak through the choices. What is his name? Kendi, the author of How to Be an Anti-Racist.
Kendi.
He had 3 shows, and they're still doing one, but they canceled the other 2. One was Anti-Racist Baby. And again, like I got to be very careful. Like this is such delicate stuff to talk about. Yeah. Like it's not like a cause celebre. I mean, but you have to, whatever the show is and whatever it's about and who's making it. First things first, it has to be exciting. That's it.
Yeah. And I'm not for canceling anything unless it's like, that show Cuties.
Right. There you go.
But even even if, let's say I don't agree with everything Kimmy says, or if I do, who cares? But I don't think like them starting to deplatform other content should be the thing. I thought more so they're just making a case that they're a service that is just going to platform diverse content.
Right.
But I didn't know that they're canceling certain things, even if whatever. I just don't think things should be necessarily canceled, but that's another conversation. I want to ask you this, or were you about to say something? Sorry.
I'm sorry. Somebody was just coming in the room, but they left. Yeah, sorry about
that.
Okay. Sorry. Wait, I agree with you. That's touchy. It's not. I think the things they were canceling were mostly in development. And my read on it is that algorithmically, in terms of viewers, they were realizing that this sort of content under discussion appeals to only a certain percentage of people. That's why it's part of why I said the working class thing, because that is in an odd way that is an underrepresented group also, by a different metric. Yeah.
And you talked about this in your piece about the world's changing. So we're seeing with Netflix, we're seeing things like Spotify and just society and culture, we're seeing things change. And then the last sentence in your piece, you said, let me see. You said the world is changing, and when the jesting are caught punching down, the psalmists begin punching back. And I know you know about this, but in April last month, after you wrote this piece, Dave Chappelle got attacked on stage at the Hollywood Bowl by a 23-year-old. And I remember being on the phone with you. We're like, what are we going to do? Are you going to add this in your piece because it was finished? Or should we do an editorial note? And I love your move of just doing the editorial note, because I think that is like the understated mic drop of the piece, because you say the Solomons begin punching back, and then you're like, oh, by the way, last month or this coming month, Dave Chappelle was attacked. And it just was very eerie. And I think I told you how it read. It was very, very eerie. Were you surprised by this tack given the essay you just wrote? Were you shocked at all?
No, it was sort of an inevitability from the moment Will Smith slapped Chris Rock. It was in the mail at that point. It's interesting that it hit Chappelle, who's like a whole culture unto himself. But that's where we are. And I'm glad you kind of led me to this spot in terms of how the piece ends, the solemn will punch back, because I want to make very clear, because I've said so many things in this interview that have skewered moderate or sort of expressed impatience with the solemn. I want to make clear that all their precepts, all their ideas, all the things they want are the correct. That's not the right word. They're the right things. I think morally, culture should progress toward what they're looking for, which is more tolerance, equality, fairness, justice. 110%. My only issue, and I'm not sure I did a terrific job of communicating it, is that the way is sort of an anti-persuasive approach they have to communicating it, which sort of telegraphs other motives they might have for swimming in these waters. And I think a lot of people share these frustrations, so I'm very big on, as an entrepreneur, and being a speechwriter, ghostwriter, and with books and movies and stuff, I'm very big on negotiating. And negotiation is such a good way to interact with other people and just get to know, just exercise compassion and empathy and walk in the other person's shoes. And it's just such a wonderful thing to know and learn and do and practice. And we need more of it in politics.
Yeah, and I think people will get that sentiment that you just said perfectly when they read your piece. And not even when. I think in this interview, you do a great job at not just being completely partisan. I think that you're making a case for everyone. You're seeing everyone's side, and that's what makes this piece so exciting. So as we wrap up, I want to ask these questions to you. So you can answer which one you want, but I want to say, like, from a philosophical point of view. Okay, let me start that over. I want to ask a couple of questions to you. So I want to say this from a philosophical point of view. Why do you think we laugh? Like, what's the point of laughter? And then if you want to answer this too, final notes on why are we so afraid of clowns?
Okay. I think it is a biochemical response. I think it's a form of release. Like it's something of a bodily function. It's definitely natural. Like, I don't think, is it learned? Like, it seems natural. Like, I think some animals do it. So I think it's release. I think it's like a release of tension, stress, and pressure. And I think that's part of why I think it is healthy to laugh. I remember my wife and I took a course on laughter, and just like, you can also do it voluntarily and automatically. Like, you can make yourself do it, and even that feels good. And even in conversation, like, I know we all experience this, like, you're sitting around a table with people, like, you might not think it's the most hilarious thing ever, but you'll laugh to be a good sport, and you'll laugh at the intentional, you'll laugh to, get closer to the people around you, and it feels good,
Mm-hmm.
But then other times you have your, like, most hilarious friends that, like, completely obliterate you, and you're just laughing uncontrollably, and it's like, it feels so good. I mean, and I value so much when it happens. So I think it's like a bodily release.
Awesome. And that's what you give to the world, because you've made me laugh so much as we've gotten to know each other. And I'm sure people are going to be laughing in a good way when they see this interview. So is there anything that you would like to announce, anything coming up you'd like to plug? I mean, whatever.
Not at the moment, but thank you for mentioning Red Dennis, because that's like the champion peak of absurdity. And it actually encompasses a lot of what I was trying to talk about today, in terms of, like, just like how political ideas can mirror and sort of become like a snake eating its own tail situation where you don't know which end is up. And there's definitely a comedic streak through that. And that was the last book I had come out. And I have screenplays and things in the works, but nothing I can talk about.
Okay, great. Well, I can't wait for Red Dennis to come into the mail, and I'm going to read that ASAP.
I'm actually sending it today.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So thank you, Eric, for coming on to LCs today. I appreciate you taking time for us. And if you would like to know more about Eric, that information will be on the LC's publication page. Also, if you've not read this essay, see the link below and be sure to share. I am Brittany King. This is LCs. Thank you for watching. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you. It was nice seeing you. I'm so glad we did this.